caught you off
Right
guard,
here,
huh,
here's the
by,
first question.
by moving to questions so quickly.
Hi, Senator Bell. My name is Jonathan Padilla, and I'm from California. And you speak of giving people power to make laws. And in California, we have the proposition system where citizens are empowered to propose propositions, and then the entire body politic votes on them. But my question in that regard is, how could you possibly devise a system that mitigates the influence of special interest in allowing, direct democracy to take form? Because at least in California, the system has been abused by large interest and special powers like that.
And of course, that's exactly what happens in representative government. It's abused. So in writing the legislation, which took me 10 years to do, I was informed by the experience. I lived in California for 10 years after I left office. And so I was informed by what took place in California and also other states. In the last 100 years, we have enacted probably over about 1,030 laws. I've read them all, at least the titles of them. And I've been to Switzerland, and I've lectured there in Bern, and I'm familiar with their process. And so when I wrote this national initiative, the law in question, I designed it. And incidentally, I might say that in California, the state has funded a number of studies which are just awesome in addressing the problems. The problem is nobody's ever enacted the reforms into law. And so I've plagiarized a lot of those reforms into the legislation I'm talking about. And so all the shortcomings are not there. In fact, we've designed almost what I would call, or what I hope is a perfect law, because a lot of times laws are corrupted by compromises. People say, oh, it's nice to compromise. I've never found compromises to be really highly overrated. We're all going to get together and we're all going to be happy and we're going to hold hands. That's not the way. Accomplishments don't come about that way. And so, but since we knew that this was going to be a tough one to enact into law, we didn't compromise. Now, one of the things we did is now keep in mind, the National Initiative is both a constitutional amendment and a federal statute. The statute are where all the legislative procedures are, which are essentially a copy of the procedures of the Congress and of all legislative bodies. Hearings, markups, advisories, communications, all of that is all set up in there. But in the constitutional part of it, then that sets it up so that the Supreme Court can't touch what we're doing. But one of the things I inserted in the constitutional part of this law is that money can only come from a natural person. And that's a backhanded way of saying that since only human beings can vote, only human beings can give, meaning no corporations can put up any money in the initiative process. And obviously, when Americans see how well that will work, that means we'll take out money out of the entire political process, which is, of course, the corrupting agent of the political process. So you're quite right. We don't have a perfect system in the states that we do. But keep in mind, when you look at the whole avenue of history, we founded the country with essentially the Declaration of Independence. Then and that was what was, in my idea, was the ideal of all human beings, that all human beings are created equal. So our Declaration of Independence, I take as a declaration of the human race. That's the level I put it at. And then 8 years later, at the convention in Philadelphia, and there's a chapter in the book that I have, the last chapter of the book, where I call Who Stole the American Dream? Well, it's the dream of the world. And it wasn't stolen recently, it was stolen in Philadelphia. Because when the people who got there, the elite, wealthy people, when they got there, they wanted to save what they had, which was the Confederation was falling apart. And so they made a deal with the devil for slavery. And so all of the shortcomings, the undemocratic shortcomings of the Constitution, were all put in place to safeguard slavery, and we've lived with the consequences of it. And the primary one was the fact the founding fathers all thought that people should make laws. If you look at a lot of their quotes, they say, and I've got a series of quotes in the index of the book, the appendix of the book, and you'll notice that they say, oh, the people should be able to change their government whenever they feel it serves their interests for their happiness. And that's lawmaking. What else is it? So what happened on the way to Philadelphia? Because they did not put any procedures for the people to be able to do this. Because when they locked in slavery, the leader of this was Rutledge from South Carolina, and he really ate everybody's lunch because he locked down slavery so tight that it took a civil war to correct the situation. And so as a result of that, you have a lot of factors in the Constitution that were very undemocratic, and the main one was, and that was that the creation article. See, Article 5, where a lot of scholars will tell you that's how you amend the Constitution, that's how the government amends the Constitution, not how the people amend the Constitution. The people would amend the Constitution in the same article where they created the Constitution, which is in Article 7. But Article 7 does not have any procedures to do that. And that's where the procedures should have gone, but they didn't put them in there because they knew that if they were there, the people would have immediately then taken out slavery at the first opportunity. And most people don't realize that the first lobbying effort in the first days of the first Congress were the Quakers in Pennsylvania under the leadership, using the name of Ben Franklin. He was too old to go there physically, but they were there to try to bring about the repeal of slavery in the Constitution, and that proved that there was no stomach for the continuation of slavery. And so what happened, they did not provide the procedures for the people to amend the Constitution, and so you were denied the right to make laws. Now, the next major step that took place was as a result of the corruption that took place at the turn of the century, the abject corruption. Then along came the progressives and the populists, but mostly the progressives, passing laws to create what they called IRR, Initiative, Referendum, and Recall. And so then, but then they weren't sophisticated enough to realize that they should have made this independent of representative government. And so the laws in California and all the other states are controlled by representative government. It should be independent. And that's what I've done, is I've made it independent. You've got the representative government, and then you've got the people, and the people have their own agency, which is the electoral trust. You see, the agency of the states that have this now is representative government, and that's what corrupts the process. And so now with the agency of the electoral trust, the people are totally independent. They make laws, and the representative government makes laws in parallel. The difference is that the people become the senior partners automatically, because they now can amend the Constitution with 2 votes, 6 months apart, but no longer than on a majoritarian basis, but no longer than a year apart. So that's the dynamic of what took place. This whole scholarship that I've pointed out in chapter 12, Who Stole the American Dream, is there in some detail, and I'm very proud of it, because I don't consider myself a great scholar, but it's something that I researched and developed, and very proud of it, and nobody's laid a glove on it. In fact, I'll give you the kernel of insight that really says it all. If people will say, well, you can't amend the Constitution unless you have the government involved. Well, keep in mind, the language of the Constitution right at the beginning says, we the people do ordain. Well, whatever ordains is the creator ordains. So it means that we are the sovereigns. We created this country. So we ordain. So now if we are going to make a change as the creator, and we have to ask permission of what we created, then we're not the creator, we're not the sovereigns. That's ludicrous to say that we have to ask permission of what we created to change the Constitution. And so that is where we're at in this regard. And that logic has never been touched by anybody in any place. In fact, one of the scholars at Harvard is Professor Richard Parker, who was at a conference that we brought together, and he's very singular in supporting the national initiative and what it means in empowering the people of the United States. We have him on the video endorsing what we're doing. In fact, I want to Amar and another scholar by the name of Tushnet down in Georgetown, in a review on a constitutional basis by these people could be very, very helpful in getting people to accept the book. Because the media, this goes over their head. They don't even understand. It truly, I've been interviewed a lot by mainline media. I'm talking about the networks now, the 5 networks. They don't even understand what I'm talking about when I talk about empowering the people. Because you see, they, like the body politic, will have their power diluted. See, they are the intermediaries between the body politic and the people. They distill what you find out about what's going on. And so now, if you don't need them in the lawmaking process because you're going to make your own laws, then that dilutes their power. And that's the reason why they can't begin to understand anything that would dilute their power.